Joining me now is Congressman Darren LaHood. Congressman, it's good to see you. It's been a little while.
Good to be with you, Paul.
Let's talk about what's going on in Washington, certainly that which affects the local area here. I want to start with the ongoing investigations into classified documents, certainly at President Biden's home. And of course, everybody knows they've been found at Mar-a-Lago with former President Trump. Mike Pence had a few. But you are working across the aisle with Congressman Mike Quigley to get some legislation done to address it. Tell me about that.
Well, Paul, I serve on the House Intelligence Committee and honored to be a part of that. Also, Congressman Mike Quigley does too. And as a former federal prosecutor, also, it's disturbing to me the information we've heard about classified documents being unsecured, with a number of elected officials and former elected officials. And so it has caused us on the Intelligence Committee and others to be very, very concerned about this, this evidence that's come forth. And so we've tried to figure out what we can do differently to help deter this behavior in the future. And so if you look at the criminal statute, Paul, it just pertains to criminal violations. What we want to do is we want to add civil violations. Right now, it's either you get indicted criminally based on intent and knowledge, and there's no ability to fine somebody or to prohibit somebody from receiving classified briefings in the future, or to take away clearances. And so what we're looking at in a bipartisan way is how do we make the statute more robust with the ultimate goal of deterrence and making sure that this type of behavior that we've seen doesn't continue.
And that makes a lot of sense for almost anybody you'd be referring to, but I have to focus in on a president and a vice president where documents seem to be in more places than just a SCIF, although I think most of the White House is a SCIF. So would this work when you have a president who, boxed something up and there it is, they didn't even know about it?
Well, it's unacceptable anytime that classified documents or unsecured documents are found outside of a SCIF, which is a secured compartmentalized information format. It's a secured location. Serving on the Intelligence Committee, Paul, the first day I started there, they warn you about taking documents out of the SCIF. Clearly, there were, appears to be violations here. Now, what we've looked at, was it intentional? Was it willful? Or was it sloppiness? Was it negligence? Was it an accident? And that's why we have a special counsel looking into this. And I'm glad there's a special counsel for President Trump and a special counsel for Vice President Biden. I mean, there are a lot of questions that still need to be answered. And listen, they may be criminally charged and that may be the right approach to take. But we, I think, have an obligation and a responsibility to deter future behavior like this, to make sure it never happens again, and to look at the issue of overclassification and other people that are involved with the process. Aides that are around the president, those type of things we think need to be, remedied.
Well, I'll look forward to talking about that once that develops. Let's come home a little bit by talking about one of your committee assignments, because your constituents want to know about that. You have been put on the new Select Committee on China. Talk about what the responsibilities are there.
Well, listen, I'm honored to be a part of the Select Committee on China. It was one of the first bills we passed in the new House majority. But it should be noted, Paul, it was a very bipartisan vote. 100 Democrats supported the new Select Committee on China. I don't say this lightly, Paul. China has a plan to replace the United States. And they're working at it every single day. They're working on it from a military standpoint, from a technology standpoint, from a national security standpoint, from a trade standpoint, from a diplomatic standpoint. And so serving on the House Intelligence Committee has given me insight to that. But this new Select Committee in a bipartisan way is going to look at what can we do differently to counteract the malign activities of China, whether it's in the South China Sea, whether it's with Taiwan, whether it's with Hong Kong, whether it's stealing our intellectual property. Talk to anybody that works in Silicon Valley or anybody who works in the tech space, and you see China continues to abide by a different set of rules and standards. So this committee is going to come up with policy measures to look in a bipartisan way how we can counteract China. And I don't look at this as a Democrat or Republican issue, Paul. This is an American issue.
Are you sensitive? I'm sure you are, but talk about the sensitivity that there would be or should be regarding the potential starting, because of this work, of an irreversible conflict. President Biden has said, look, we're not headed to another Cold War, but people have those concerns.
Well, listen, in some ways, China has put themselves in this position. Let's remember, A year ago, we had the invasion of Ukraine. The number one backer of Putin is Xi Jinping in China. He talked about an unbreakable bond. There's talk that he's going to go this next week to Moscow on the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. And so he continues to support the war butcher that is Putin. And by the way, the only other allies Putin has is Iran and North Korea. So what we've said with China, obviously we are intertwined economically. A lot of my farmers sell corn and soybeans to China. There's a lot of products from Illinois that are manufactured that go to China. So, we have to keep that in mind. But when China continues to abide by a different set of rules and standards, we have to take action here. And that's what this committee is about.
Most of the news coverage we see about what's going on in the new Republican-controlled House has to do with all the investigations that are going to go on, a whole list of those. But what I wanted to ask you about is what legislative agenda will Republicans have? You're working with the democratically controlled Senate. You got a Democratic president. Some would argue, well, we can't do anything. That's why we'll investigate everything on oversight. But is there an agenda? You had the Tyree Nichols case, for example. Will we see police reform? What can we expect?
Well, I think if you look at the results of the election and now the new Republican majority, I think we have to look at things in two different respects. One, we have to look at what did the voters want us to do? And I look at four things there. They want an economy that is strong. They want a nation that is safe. They want a future built on freedom, and they want a government that's accountable. That's number one. On the other side, we have an obligation in our checks and balance responsibility of the Constitution to hold the Biden administration accountable. That has to be done, in a reasonable way. But you're going to see that on our committees: the Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Ways and Means Committee that I serve on. We have to make sure that we're holding the Biden administration accountable. And we're going to do that in a substantive way, in a serious way, to make sure, that's the nature of our democracy, is the checks and balances. That's our responsibility. And so there is no doubt when you look at issues, securing the border is a big one. I think there should be bipartisan support on that. Getting back to energy independence is a big issue also. And again, as I mentioned earlier, holding China accountable is a bipartisan issue. So I think there's plenty of areas that we can work together to help move the country forward and work with our Democrat colleagues.
Very quickly, are Speaker McCarthy's hands a bit too tied because of the promises he made to the Freedom Caucus, or is he free?
I don't think so. I think it was a healthy process to go through. I know it didn't look that way, but our democracy is complicated. It's messy. That's by design. And so we were going to have that fight then, or we're going to have it now. I think we've put in place the mechanism to be very, very successful. And so we just got to make sure that everybody knows their lane to be in and does the best job possible. And always remembering that, there's an election in 2 years.
Congressman Darren LaHood, Republican of Illinois, thank you for your time, sir. Please come back soon.
Thank you, Paul.
And coming up, a closer look at the push for police reform on Capitol Hill, what the Congressional Black Caucus wants.